All right. Hi, guys. I'd ask how everyone's doing today, but it looks like an awful lot of you are feeling the fours today. Welcome to class. And there we go. All right. Lots of people staggering in a little bit late. Thanks to everybody who gets here on time or a little bit early. Let us get started this morning. With some announcements. Okay, so I got a message this morning that Ventura College is going to delay the start of in-person teaching for another couple of weeks because COVID rates, hospitalizations are so high right now in our area. Now, this has caused a lot of discussion going on among the faculty. If you're taking a lecture class, you know, we'll make the best of it. It's not what any of us would like, but we'll make the best of it. We can. But if you're taking a lab course, that is complicated to do. If you're scheduled for an in-person lab, shifting it to a Zoom lab, for me, for the lab that I'm teaching, it's just a lot more work, and I'm not real happy with the way Zoom labs are going. So the faculty is discussing how to make this work with labs. We will let you guys know if you're taking a lab course when a decision has been made and exactly what's going on. But for right now, things are kind of still up in the air for lab stuff. Does anybody want to ask me anything about this at this point? Our continued remoteness? It'd be interesting to see how many people change their expression on the cat sheet if you find out we're going remote for 2 more weeks. All right. So, announcements for how would a lab work online? Well, that's going to depend on each lab. For the bio labs, if they are completely online, if you enrolled as an online or remote lab, you come to campus, you pick up a kit, you basically do a modified version of the lab at home in your kitchen or bathroom. But they want us, if we're supposed to be doing in-person labs, to be doing labs by Zoom. And I think whoever made that decision had no idea how that was going to work. So if you're taking a lab, you'll have to wait and hear from your instructor about exactly how the labs are going to work. Okay. So there is a video on our course website about the metric system. Chances are, if you grew up outside of the United States, you're very familiar with this. And you can probably do the associated assignment without having to watch the video. America is one of only 3 countries in the world that does not use the metric system. The others are Myanmar and I think it's Liberia. So we're kind of sticking out as the oddballs here. In science, we always use the metric system. So you're going to need to have a grounding in it for learning about science, basically. So there are a couple of assignments due over the next week. Make sure you follow up, keep an eye on the website, and get all your assignments in on time if you can. The project proposal is due before midnight on January 30th. Let me make myself a note. I will post a place on Canvas to submit these. And what I want from you are basically what you would like to do your project on, so a topic, and then how you would like to present what you learn about that topic. Remember, I am very flexible about both topics and presentation, so feel free to go out on a limb, do something a little crazy. It's a lot of fun for me when students do things like make a graphic novel or write a song. And I've had students do those in the past, and they've gone over really well for the class, although they're obviously something students are not usually familiar with doing beforehand. Our first exam is scheduled for February 7th. Gosh, that's going to be fun since we're still going to be remote. I'm going to have to figure out how to do that one. More information will be coming. Like I said, I just found out this morning that we're going to be remote a couple of weeks longer. Okay. Let's go back one. Two more things. I was looking over your intro quizzes and I saw a couple of things that stuck out. Somebody was talking about study guides and how much they appreciate study guides. So for the exams, we are going to have time to do review sessions the week before, the Friday before the exam. And I will have a study guide for exams. For the quizzes, you're basically going to use the terminology and concepts sheets as your study guide for the quizzes. They're going to come largely off of those sheets. And the other thing I saw when I asked you guys about what kind of topics you're interested in, a huge, huge number of you guys said genetics. So I'm going to try and manipulate the schedule a little bit, see if we can get some extra time carved out to do a more in-depth discussion of genetics, because it's really interesting. You guys are interested in it, and there's a lot of complexity there that you really don't get in a typical biology 100 level or freshman level biology course. So we're going to try and mix things up, add that in. All right. So today we're going to talk chemistry. If I was in class, I can imagine you guys moaning at this person. Why do we have to learn chemistry? Well, guys, chemistry is everything. Everything is chemicals. Chemistry is the basis for all of the functions of the cell, and the functions of the cell are the basis for all of the functions of the organism. Remember, the cells are your basic unit of life. So we're going to talk about chemistry, and we're going to then talk some about cells because they are the base. They're the ground level of biology. The current estimate is that the human body has as many as 30 trillion cells. This is a number that's so big, it's just hard to comprehend. 1 trillion seconds would take 32,000 years. Wow, it's a huge number of cells in our bodies. You could kind of see why we want to talk about them a little bit. And everything in the universe is chemicals. It's often called matter. So matter is the chemistry term for anything that takes up space and has mass. Mass, it's complicated and it doesn't exactly mean this, but you can consider this basically the same as weight. Weight is a measure of mass and gravity. So for simple purposes, because it's way too hard to measure mass, we measure weight instead. Okay, I see somebody's having sound issues. Is anybody else having problems? Nope. Okay, good. So if you're having sound issues, you might want to log off and come back in, see if that helps. All right. So everything that exists is chemicals. If you see things that are sold that say chemical free, I've seen things like chemical free water, chemical free medications. They don't exist. I love these images where they show like this apple and list all of the ingredients, because people like to think about, well, an apple is an apple. It doesn't have chemicals in it. But it really does. And it has a lot of things that most people would not know what it is, like oxalic acid. What is that? Pantothenic acid. What in the world is that? Is that dangerous? Nicotinamide. Oh, that sounds scary. But it's really not. It's just natural chemicals. So when we think about chemicals, they're organized into elements. You've probably seen the periodic table before. Each one of these boxes represents a different element. An element is something that can't easily be broken down by normal chemical means. And it's kind of the simplest structure. If you do break down an element into something smaller, it no longer has the identity of that element. It's something completely different. All atoms of an element are going to have the same chemical properties. A carbon atom in my body is going to have the same chemical properties as a carbon atom in a plant, in a rock of coal. Doesn't matter where it is. And our most Let's see if I can do this. Our most common elements in biology: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen. Let's see, there we go, phosphorus and sulfur. One, two, hydrogen. So these make up 95% of our bodies. Only 5% is made up of atoms of any other elements. So when we talk about elements, we're talking about atoms. The atom is the smallest unit of an element. This is what's called a Bohr model of an atom. It is not exactly an accurate depiction of what an atom really looks like. We're going to talk a lot about, we're going to talk a little bit about atoms. This is a great way for you to visualize them. It's easy to picture in your head, and it really helps you understand the very, very basic chemistry we're going through. All right. When we talk about the elemental identity of the atom, we generally tend to abbreviate the elements. The atomic symbol, that's just the fancy name for the abbreviation. It tends to be 1 or 2 letters that stand in for the name of the element. So oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. These are the most common elements, and very nicely, they are all single letters. Some others will have 2 letters, like helium. If it's 2 letters, it's very important to remember the second letter is going to be lowercase, the first letter uppercase. And this is important because this is not the same thing as that. This is carbon monoxide. There's a carbon and an oxygen atom bound together. And this is cobalt, which is very, very different from carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, you may have heard of this. It's a gas. It can be toxic. It's a problem sometimes with heating systems. They'll release carbon monoxide. It builds up in the house. Cobalt is a metal. It is often used as a blue pigment. So very, very different things here. Atoms are made up of 3 subatomic particles: protons, neutrons, and electrons. Copy down this table right here. So protons and neutrons are found in the center of an atom. We call this the nucleus. The nucleus of an atom is not the same thing as the nucleus of a cell. A cell typically has around 100 trillion atoms. Geez, again, that's a huge freaking number. Whereas an atom has it's one atom. So there's a huge size difference here. Nucleus is just a nice general term for the center of something. The electrons orbit around the nucleus. The subatomic particles have a mass associated with them. The protons and the neutrons, the parts in the nucleus, have a mass of 1. The unit is atomic mass units, so it's specialized specifically for atoms. Electrons weigh such a small fraction of an atomic mass unit that as far as we're concerned, we call this 0. And then the protons and the electrons also have a charge on them. Protons have a positive charge of 1. Electrons have a negative charge of 1. And that's really important when we start talking about ions. So a whole atom can have a charge sometimes if the number of protons is not equal to the number of electrons. And this is an image from 2013. Each one of these dots is an atom. I think they used gold for this particular one, but it's an incredible image. They actually made a short video of it, and it's one of the first images of an atom. It's amazing that we can actually see these things nowadays. Okay, how are we doing on subatomic particles? They did not use an electron microscope for this one. They had to come up with a completely new type of microscope in order to image atoms. I don't remember what they called it, but it's really cool. I think I've got another image that's been made since this one of an actual atom, and it's just, there's a British word, gobsmacking, and boy, my gob is smacked at these images. All right. So when we look at a periodic table, we see these different squares, and they're all slightly different, but that's indicative. They indicate a specific element. So this box would be iron. Yeah, iron is Fe. This is not logical. Some of these, a lot of them are logical, but some of them are just out there. And you'll also see what we call an atomic number and a mass number. The mass number is always the bigger number. The atomic number is equal to the number of protons in that element. So for molybdenum, the atomic number is 42. Every atom of molybdenum has 42 protons. The number of protons determines the elemental identity of an atom. So if you have an atom that has 2 protons, it's going to be helium, period. There's no exception to this rule. This is kind of an important concept here. The number of protons tells you what element an atom is. Now, of course, it's not like we're going to be counting protons in our heads, but or with a microscope or anything, but that's how we identify things. The mass number is equal to the number of protons and neutrons. So remember, neutrons are also in the nucleus and they have a mass of 1. So we just add up the number of protons, each has a mass of 1, plus the number of neutrons with a mass of 1 to get an atomic mass. So helium here has an atomic number of 2, which tells you how many protons?
2.
2, exactly. It has a mass number of 4. So how many neutrons? 2, good. So that's easy for helium. But for iron here, the mass number is 55.847. Why is that not a whole number? You can't have 0.8 neutrons. So atoms of one element can have different numbers of neutrons. The mass that you see on the periodic table is what's called a is the average mass of that element. So it kind of gives, yeah, I hear somebody. Did you have a question? Nope, okay. That gives you an idea that tells you right off the bat that there are different isotopes of that element. Isotopes just being atoms of one element with different numbers of neutrons. Okay. We're flying through the chemistry because we only need to know a little bit about it. So if you have questions, please speak up. All right. I'm going to come back to this in just a second. Okay, so here's our periodic table. Notice how all these boxes get lined up in rows and columns. I'm not really going to talk about why you've got this funky shape. But you'll see we start out at the upper left with hydrogen that has 1 proton, helium 2, lithium 3, beryllium 4, boron 5. So reading like you would read a book, starting at the upper left, each box gives you a slightly larger element. And the rows, we don't need to know that. I'm going to mark that off in my notes. What we do need to know is that atoms in a, ooh, that's a huge arrow. Atoms in an individual column are gonna have similar chemical behaviors, how they interact with other atoms. If you go into chemistry, there'll be a lot of explanations of why this is and all of that. But basically, it means a carbon atom is going to be similar in chemical behavior to silicon, which is similar to behavior in germanium, which I think is a pretty uncommon element because that's not one I'm all that familiar with. Oxygen is similar to sulfur. Obviously, it's not completely the same because we need oxygen to live. And while we need sulfur, we're not breathing it. It's not doing the same things in our body. Okay. Now we're going to do, I think this is our first poll in class. This is anonymous. So a poll is going to show up. It's got 3 questions. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to answer them. And then we're going to talk about the results and see how well y'all are keeping up, or if I need to go back and explain something again. If you don't know, guess. Just about 20 more seconds for the stragglers. Okay. So let's take a look at how we did as a class. What subatomic particle determines the elemental identity of an atom? Pretty good. Most of us got proton. Proton is the correct answer there. What subatomic particle can be found outside of the nucleus? Again, mostly did pretty good here. It is the electron. Ooh, not so good down here with this question. What would be the mass number for an atom with 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 7 neutrons? So let's go back over that by going to this table. We're talking about mass Electrons have a mass that's basically 0. Neutrons have a mass of 1. Protons have a mass of 1. So if we have 6 protons, 6 times 1 is 6. We have 6 electrons. 6 times 0 is 0. And 7 neutrons for a mass of 7. So our total mass is 13. So really all you're doing is adding the protons to the neutrons. All right. Not too bad there. Now, this is another image of an atom. In fact, this is a hydrogen atom. Hydrogen atoms have 1 proton. You can see the proton kind of here in the center. That's the nucleus where all the mass is. Now it only has 1 electron. So this is a weird image. We don't have an actual picture of the electron. What we have instead is a bunch of marks that kind of combine to make a close-in circle around the nucleus and a slightly further out circle. Electrons move very, very fast around the nucleus. And so this image is basically giving you an average location for the electron. Where is the electron most of the time? So you can see most of the time it's in this darker area here, but sometimes it moves further out. This is using a quantum microscope, which like seriously intense and seriously cool. What was I gonna do? I was gonna skip that. Oh, okay. Make notes and then I don't always follow them closely. So I mentioned isotopes, where you have different atoms of the same element with different numbers of neutrons. Some of these will be unstable. And these unstable isotopes are what we call radiation. So the atom I described with 6 protons, the mass of 13 is called carbon-13, and it is a radioactive element. I should probably move to the whiteboard so I can write all of this up without trying to work around this really cool picture here. Okay. All right. Unstable isotopes are radiation. Carbon-13 is a radioactive isotope. Not all isotopes are radioactive, which means that it breaks down. In the case of carbon-13, it breaks down. It basically will end up losing a neutron and it becomes carbon-12, which is a very, very stable form of carbon. There's a different isotope called carbon-14, which is also unstable, but that one breaks down to nitrogen. So it loses, no, wait. Yes, it loses. I'm trying to type one word and talk at the other. It loses a proton and becomes a different element. Chemically in your body, radioactive isotopes and non-radioactive isotopes, they act the same way. So we have carbon-13, carbon-12, and carbon-14 in our bodies. And our body just treats them all the same. We can use radiation and radioactive isotopes for lots of medical imaging. So if you've ever gotten something like a PET scan, they'll often use radioactive isotopes that go into your body and concentrate in a specific area, for example, and take an image of that, because we can see radiation really, really easily. And we are constantly exposed to low levels of radiation. Low levels of radiation, our bodies we have mechanisms to handle low levels of radiation. So we can minimize the damage from a typical exposure. High levels can damage cells. And we can see this. If you've ever gotten a sunburn is a sign of radiation damage, radiation from the sun hitting our bodies. And a lot of this radiation can damage DNA, which can sometimes lead to cancer. But on the good side, as I mentioned, it can be used for medical imaging. It can be used to sterilize medical and dental products. And high doses of radiation can kill cancer cells.
I have a question. Does the radiation cause your skin to tan?
Yeah, the tan color of your skin with exposure to sunlight is a response to the radiation. The dark pigment in our skin blocks radiation. It blocks sunlight radiation. So it's a defense mechanism. Your skin gets darker to try and block some of that potentially damaging ultraviolet radiation from the sun.
How does the low pigmentate people get sunburns?
How do low pigment people get sunburned?
Yes.
That's actually damage to the cells that you're seeing. So, and it doesn't matter, dark pigmented people can get sunburned too. It just takes longer. Brown and yellow pigments block the UV radiation. The red color is a sign of damage. Does that clear that up? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Can a welding machine tan you? I don't know about that because I don't know much about welding. But I do know that if you get high doses of radiation for cancer treatment, that you'll get a tan where the radiation has been applied. So that can cause a tan. There's a comment that a welding machine can burn you. I don't know if that's a radiation burn or if that's just a different kind of burn. I just don't know enough about that topic. Anything else you want to know about radiation? Okay. How can you tell if you have been exposed to high amounts? Oh, that's such a good question. Some kinds of radiation will result in a sunburn, but not all types. And it is not always possible to tell if you've been exposed to high amounts from the ground and the soil. Oh yeah, there. Radon is a common radiation from the ground. You cannot tell if you've been exposed to high amounts. There's not a way to do that except to do radon testing in a house. It's been a while, when the nuclear reactor at Chernobyl in Russia melted basically, and there was this massive collapse there, the Western world outside of the local area found out about it because people who work with radiation have to wear these little badges that register radiation exposure. And all of the sudden, in Scandinavia and Sweden and Finland and Norway, all the people who worked in medicine and science with radiation, all of their badges were coming in saying they'd been exposed to higher than normal levels of radiation. And that's how we found out about Chernobyl, because of course, Russia's not going to tell us. The only time you're going to see an outward appearance is, like I said, the sunburn types of radiation. But it's also, let me think about how to put this. If you get incredibly high doses, you will get very, very sick very, very quickly. And you'll have symptoms like uncontrolled bleeding, damage to your skin, which is visible, besides just sunburn, but like wounds not healing kind of thing. But that's nuclear, that's radiation sickness. And that's nuclear meltdowns, atomic bombs, and that sort of stuff. What is actually going on in radiation sickness? Wow, you guys are really getting me here. It's been a long time since I've learned this stuff. I'm pulling from way back in the brain here. What is actually going on in radiation sickness is the cells are dying. And the cells that die first are the cells that divide most rapidly. So the first symptoms of radiation sickness are also what you get with cancer radiation. Your hair falls out because the cells that make hair divide very rapidly to make hair grow. Skin damage, your skin cells divide very rapidly to help repair and replace damaged skin. Your digestive system can have a lot of problems because those cells have to be replaced quickly. Blood cells are replaced quickly. And so you'll see damage to those kinds of things first. Other types of cells, cells in your bones, cells in your brain, do not divide very quickly at all. In fact, a lot of times they might never divide once you're an adult. And so you're not going to see early damage to the brain or the bones with radiation exposure. Can you inhale radiation? Okay. Yes. but a lot of the radiation that causes radiation sickness will go right through your skin. So depending on the type of radiation, and please don't ask me about this because then we have to start talking about alpha decay versus beta decay, and I do not remember the details of that. So different kinds of lower energy radiation, you can inhale that, and your lungs have a very thin lining on them, so you can have gas exchange. So it's much easier for those inhaled radiation to do damage to your lungs. This is one of the reasons smoking causes lung cancer. It's radiation. Yes, there's radiation in cigarettes. And bad news is other things you smoke can also increase your risk of lung cancer. When you burn things, you very often kind of speed up the breakdown process of radioactive things, and you're inhaling it, which is a part of your body that is more susceptible to radiation damage. You can also swallow radiation. That is, if it's a low dose radiation, that's less likely to cause much of a problem because you've got a better lining in your digestive system, but it could cause digestive problems. It could hurt the bacteria in your digestive tract. It can hurt the cells lining your digestive tract, but it's less likely to have major damage on a wide scale. If it's high energy radiation, forget about it. It doesn't matter how you get exposed to that. It's going to cause a lot of problems. Okay. Anything else you guys want to learn about radiation? All right. Okay. So these are more Bohr models of atoms. Oh, wait, somebody else chimed in with another question there. How do X-rays work? You know, I don't know the exact details of that. It is a type of radiation, but I don't know the details. Oh, somebody says they already know. Can you explain it? Oh, like sonar. Oh, I thought it went. Well, I know the earlier X-rays, yeah, it depends on the density of the material, absolutely. Tell you what, I will look into that and we can talk about that.
Does radiation cause any sort of birth defects?
Oh yeah, radiation can cause birth defects, absolutely. Most of what we see in people who were exposed to radiation before birth is a long-term increase in cancer. But again, a lot depends on the dose and the type of radiation. So birth defects are more common in people exposed prenatally to radiation, as are miscarriages due to the amount of damage to the fetus or the embryo. I know that with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the primary problems seen in the next generation were increases in cancer. But the birth defects tends to be a little rarer and tends to be more associated with like the Chernobyl disaster, which was just absolutely uncontrolled radiation going everywhere.
Sorry, just to be more specific, radiation is caused when the carbon breaks down into like carbon 13 to carbon 12.
That's it. Yes. Now that was an example. There are other kinds, the other elements that are radioactive, but they do the same type of thing. The isotope breaks down into either a more stable form of that isotope or to a different element.
Okay, so it's the cause of an atom breaking down.
Yes, it is the result of an atom breaking down. Yes. All right. That was a good conversation. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is atomic bonds. And let me clear all of this. Whenever two elements are connected, we call this a molecule. It can be more than two elements. Large molecules with lots of atoms connected. Those are just called macromolecules. Macro just means large. So it just tells you right there what it is. Oops. So you'll often see these written out, kind of like this, H2O, which is water. That tells you that there are two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom connected together. The atoms work as parts of the molecule. H2O is a common one. We will also talk a lot about this one, which is glucose. Normally, these numbers would be what we call subscripted, so they'd be slightly smaller and kind of below the letters, but not underneath the letters, but slightly lower down. I can't do that on the whiteboard. So you're just going to have to, I don't think I can do that on the whiteboard. No, I can't do that on the whiteboard. So we'll certainly see examples of these written out correctly at some point. And depending on how the atoms interact, they can form a couple of different kinds of bonds. We're going to talk about 4 of them: ionic bonds, covalent bonds, which can be what are called polar covalent and nonpolar covalent, and hydrogen bonds. These are the most important bonds in biology. There are other kinds of bonds available. Metals form a different kind of bond. We're not going to talk about those, though. So let's start talking about these one by one, and we'll explain a little bit more detail about what they are. So with ionic bonds, one atom gives up an electron and a different atom takes up that electron. So this electron is given up by nitrogen and goes on to a chlorine. When that happens, the atom that gives up an electron will have a positive charge. We call these cations. I always like the T to the plus sign. Atoms that take up an electron have a negative charge. These are called anions. The general term for both of these is just ions. So ions can be cations if they have a positive charge, anions if they have a negative charge. When you have opposite charges, they attract each other. So a positively charged atom and a negatively charged atom are going to be pulled towards each other, and they're going to tend to stick together with this ionic bond.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I absolutely can. So ions occur when an atom changes the number of electrons. So if it gives up an electron, it now has more protons in the nucleus than electrons orbiting the nucleus. It is a cation, and it has a positive charge. If it takes up an electron, so it now has more electrons than protons, we call that an anion, and it has a negative charge. Cations and anions are attracted to each other. And this is the ionic bond. Does that clarify it a little bit?
Yes.
Good. The next kind of bond we're going to talk about are covalent bonds. So when you think of the prefix co, you might think of coordinate, cohabitate. These kinds of words, that prefix, that CO prefix, basically means together. And I misspelled that. There we go. So covalent bonds occur when atoms share electrons. So the electron spends part of its time orbiting one atom and part of its time orbiting the other atom. When we talk about these, there are two forms, polar and non-polar. I'm going to start with non-polar. In this case, two atoms share the electrons equally. Most of the time when we see this, it's usually between two atoms of the same element. So hydrogen tends to occur as two hydrogen atoms connected together. It doesn't tend to just have one atom floating around. Oxygen, nitrogen are the same way. They like to be bonded to another atom. So the oxygen we breathe in is O2. And you can see there the 2 is slightly below the O. That's what I mean when I say it's subscript. So when we breathe in a molecule of oxygen, we're breathing in two atoms. Now, we can also have polar covalent bonds. Two atoms are sharing the electrons unequally. So this bottom molecule has one carbon atom and 1, 2, 3, 4 hydrogen atoms. The electrons will spend more time around one atom in the bond than the other atom in the bond. So let's take a look at this. This carbon atom has formed a bond with this hydrogen atom. The electrons that they share will spend more time orbiting the carbon atom than they do the hydrogen atom. This carbon has another bond, a different bond with a different hydrogen atom. Same story though. The electrons spend more time with the carbon atom than with the hydrogen atom. When you have a polar bond and the electrons spend more time with one atom than the other, you get what are called partial charges. So you'll get a partial negative charge on one atom and a partial positive charge on the other atom. And that's what we mean when we call a bond or molecule polar.
Don't they also have to have a certain amount of electronegativity difference?
Yes, they do. That's more detail than we need to go into for this class, though.
Works for me.
Yeah. You're ahead of the game if you know that one.
I just took chemistry.
Oh, okay. All right. Questions on covalent bonds. If you've taken chemistry before, hopefully this is all very familiar. All right, let's try and do the last little bit here. Hydrogen bonds. If you have polar molecules, molecules with polar bonds and partial charges, those, because they have partial charges, are attracted to each other. Just like with ionic bonds. Ionic bonds, though, have full charges. So a partial positive charge, this is a water molecule. There's an oxygen and two hydrogens. The hydrogens have a partial positive charge. The oxygen has a partial negative charge. The oxygen of one water molecule will form an hydrogen bond, an attraction to the hydrogen on a different water molecule. Okay. We are just about out of time. These are relatively weak bonds. They're hydrogen bonds because, you know, they usually occur in hydrogens, with hydrogens. What kind of questions do you have for me in the last remaining minute of class? Okay. If you don't have questions,
Animals sometimes and stuff like that.
two people were talking.
I think that was me.
Can you repeat the question?
I said when are we gonna be learning about like animals and stuff like that, like plants and animals and all that.
We're going to be learning about plants and animals kind of later in the semester. I couldn't give you an exact date without pulling out the syllabus, but it's the end of the semester. I know the chemistry part is not what you really want to learn about in biology. Okay. Yeah, chemistry is awesome, but it can be hard to learn at first, and to understand how awesome it is takes a while. All right. Feel free to email me if you've got questions. You want me to go over something again? Otherwise, have a good weekend, and I'll see everybody again on Monday.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.